I'm going to be honest. This is the second start of this podcast, and it's the second start because it's a long weekend in Japan, and it's hot, and I don't go outside when it's hot because it's too bright and I'm too white, and I get sunburns. So I stay inside, and when I stay inside and I'm bored, I drink at lunch. So I'm going to try to get everything nice and balanced out. I've already done a couple of starts of the podcast, and they've all failed because when I've had a couple cocktails, I talk too fast. And then my brain is moving faster than my mouth. I think this might be a pretty common issue. So it's something to be aware of. Should something similar happen to you? The goal here is for me to just slow down. It's almost going to be a little more asthma-y today, because what I really, really want more than anything else is for you to have a beautiful week with the sound of my voice in your ear as I give you some news from Japan that may be inspiring or disappointing, or who knows. News is all over the place. They had elections very recently. In these elections, a group called Sanseito has taken a couple of seats. And this was a group that I think it was 2020 or 2021. They came to organize as a group, and since then have actually started taking on a very right-wing kind of stance, a very conservative stance. Their motto, their slogan is Japan First, which I find very funny because instead of coming up with their own slogan, what they've done is taken the MAGA slogan of America First and said, let's just do the same thing, only it's Japan First. We're showing everyone our politics, which is good because you actually want to know what kind of fascists you're dealing with when you deal with politics. But at the same time, if you're going to put Japan first, you should probably say it in Japanese. So it's not Japan First, it's Nihon Fasto. So that's really stupid because you should say it all in Japanese. So what they've done is tried to push politics to the right. And actually, because they got a lot of attention online, they actually started to get a lot of votes. And this has caused some concern that Japan might be moving more right-wing, more to the right side of the political spectrum. And something that I read is that as the Japanese yen gets weaker, politics gets more conservative, which sort of makes sense because, you're worried about your income, you're worried about the GDP, you're worried about your country. So you're going to turn to more conservative politics. But then at the same time, those conservative isolationist politics actually tend to isolate your country, which actually pushes the GDP down. It actually tends to make your economy weaker. And then you get into this vicious cycle of it gets weaker, more right-wing, weaker, more right-wing. The current leadership in Japan wants to bring in foreign people to fill roles that need to be filled. And they're talking like nurses, healthcare, these kind of things. These are very important to the current leadership because we don't have enough Japanese people to fill all these roles. So let's fill them up with people from other countries. We're not necessarily going to make them Japanese. We're not going to integrate them properly, but we need people to do the work. So let's have some people come in and do the work. Well, this party is like Japan First, baby. No way. So we don't want foreigners coming in. And the thing is, that one of the things they did was spread some lies to try to get their message apart. So they wanted to end welfare support for foreigners. But the problem is, if you're a foreigner in Japan, you can't collect welfare. The only way a non-Japanese citizen could collect welfare in Japan is if they were a permanent resident. So I have come to Japan. I've lived here for 25 years. I have a family, and I became a permanent resident. What does that mean? That means I don't have to renew my visa. I can stay in Japan because they don't want me to leave my family. They want me to stay here and work and support my family and pay into taxes. And so since I'm paying into the taxes, should something befall me or my family and we need welfare, I should get those services. It's one of those very simple, logical things where if I pay into it, I should get paid out when I need it. There is an alternative where you have foreigners come to work in Japan and they don't have to pay into the social systems because then they don't get access to the social systems. I actually would be okay with that. I think it's a bad idea, but I would actually be okay with that if you're going to don't collect the money and then you don't get any money. But then I would have more money in my bank account to take care of myself and my family should the situation arise. They wanted to enact a ban on employment in public service for foreigners. So foreign people cannot get a job as a civil servant. And what does this mean? This means you would not have foreign people dealing with foreign issues in a city hall. So let's say you're in a big city, there's a big foreign population. Let's just say Brazilians for some reason, because there's actually a factory near my place that employs a lot of Brazilians. You might want a Brazilian speaking person, someone who speaks Portuguese, in that city hall to deal with those people. But this was actually interesting. I had a student actually come to me with the actual epitome of casual racism. And I think he was trying to push my buttons, but it didn't work because it never works. You never can push my buttons because I always know what you're doing. So when I know what you're doing, I'm going to deny you the satisfaction of getting the button pushed. And he said, yeah, have you heard this story? There is a foreign civil servant been hired for this city hall in some city. I actually forget what city it was. I was like, that's fine. What's the problem? He goes, well, Japanese people don't like to be disturbed when they are going about their sort of duties, the things they have to deal with in city hall. And I was like, well, how is this foreign person going to disturb them? So I just asked the questions. Something I've actually realized now getting older is there's no point in arguing with people when someone has a belief. Ask them questions until their logic falls apart is a far more effective strategy because you're not being combative. You're not being argumentative. You're not getting into the fight. You just ask them questions. Ask them to explain their position. Ask them to explain their reasoning. And from that, their own inadequacies in their argument will come to light. And you don't have to actually point them out anymore, which is very satisfying. So this guy, he's an old-time Japanese guy. And he was saying, yeah, Japanese people don't like to be disturbed. And I was like, whoa, how does a foreign worker disturb them? Because I know the reality. I know the answer. The answer is he's not Japanese and therefore they're uncomfortable. But he hasn't started the job yet. So maybe he's really good at it. Maybe he's really bad at it. I don't know. So if he was really bad at his job and couldn't serve Japanese people at City Hall, I would actually be okay with him being fired because he's not a good fit for the position. But if he comes in and he does a really good job, how could that be disturbing to people unless they were just straight up racist? Now, he doesn't want to say Japanese people are racist. He doesn't want to say this kind of thing out loud. So you have to let that hang in the air. So I just let it go for a while. And then I just let him off the hook and moved on. But this is the kind of casual racism that's really common in Japan. And it's not that they're like overtly foreign people are bad or foreign people, but it's when a foreign person gets any position of authority, that is an incredibly negative thing. I had a conversation with a class way, way, way back. And we talked about how I would be a really good police officer. I follow the rules. I'm physically fit. I'm a very serious person, but I also know how to de-escalate. Those were kind of the attributes we ascribed to me. So I said, yeah, I'd be a really good police officer. And they were like, yeah, you'd be a really good police officer. And then I said, in Japan. And they all just stopped dead. And just the heaviness of that silence in the room was really impressive. And it was because, like, I imagine a foreign person doing a traffic stop and getting out of a car and walking up to a Japanese person in a car and actually giving them like a ticket or having a conversation with them. And they would not take it seriously. They would think this was like a prank show because that is how inconceivable it is to the average Japanese person that a foreign person, a non-Japanese person, would have authority over them in Japan. So these city hall positions, it's something similar to that. And I actually bet this Senseido reaction saying we want to ban unemployment in public services is a direct reaction to that guy getting hired. They wanted to have stricter cultural conformity. Now, I have no idea what that means. Are you going to make a rule that you have to act like a Japanese person? Are you going to make rules about how people need to behave? Because we already have public rules about noise and stuff like that. Like, so if you disturb people in public, there are already rules in place. So are you going to go further that you have to act like a Japanese person? Are they going to provide etiquette classes? These kind of things? I don't know. I think, again, they're just saying stuff to see what sticks to try to stoke anti-foreign sentiment. They claim that globalization is the reason for Japan's poverty. Now, globalization is not the reason for Japan's poverty. In my personal, as a foreigner, opinion, it's that the fact that Japan has stopped innovating. Japan has stopped actually manufacturing. Japan has actually stopped taking the forefront in a lot of things where they used to. And so that has damaged the economy. And I think Japan not working with other Asian countries like Korea and China has actually been a big detriment because of these like long historical conflicts that they can't get past. The other countries can't get past them either. This is not like a singularly Japanese issue, but I've always felt like Japan and Korea, if they could get past their differences, would be the economic superpower in the world. They claim that crime involving foreigners is a huge issue, but this fact that until 2022, there's been a consistent decade-long drop in crime overall, and of course, foreigners only making up 2 to 3% of the population, they're only making up 2 to 3% of the crime, that becomes a whole issue in itself because that's just factually inaccurate. But they had one of the Senseido people say, many of my colleagues were murdered by the Japanese Communist Party. This actually ended up in a lawsuit. The Japanese Communist Party has sued Sanseito for this statement, but they are claiming it's factual because back in 1950, so this is what they're doing. They're saying something factual and trying to make it sound like it's a current event. In 1950, there were 2 incidences of violence and 1 police officer was shot dead. Now, the person making this comment, the Sanseito member, was a police officer. And he says he still lives in fear, which if you're still living in fear because of an event back in 1950, because I actually don't know how old he was. So I don't know how old he's in now. So back in 1950, I'm assuming he wasn't that old. That is something you need to get over. Sanseito is also, of course, an anti-vax party. So during COVID, they were saying the vaccine was bad for you. You shouldn't take the vaccine, despite the fact that I've had 4. And the only problems I have is when I drink too much and I can't speak properly when I try to make a podcast. So the big surprise has been that Sanseito actually took 3 or 4 seats after the most recent election. They are involved in lawsuits. They have actually had like hate crime accusations because of some of the things they've said in their political campaign. But it seems like young people are actually resonating. Their sort of negativity about the world is coming back and they're feeding into this right-wing politics. And it's mostly young men are voting for them, but that is enough of a block that they actually have had some success. In connection to the Sanseito comments, there was a false post on X claiming that 1/3 of households on welfare actually go to foreign households. All of the welfare benefits, 33% of that actually goes to foreigners. And they're saying, like, why are we paying taxes to support foreign people who come to Japan and live off our taxes? That seems really unfair and awful. If that were the truth, I would agree with it. But again, if you start thinking the foreign population in Japan is only around 2%, maybe 3%, that seems almost statistically impossible for them to be taking 33% of the welfare benefits that are available. So it seems like actually someone moved a decimal more than anything else. There are 1.65 million households on welfare or take some sort of welfare benefit. 560,000 of those are foreign, which would equate to 33%, where the reality is it's 47,317 households that take welfare benefits who are actually led by a household. Foreign household, they have like, the way they measure households in Japan is the head of the household gets declared. And that might be, so in my case, let's say I was declared as the head of the household. This would now be a foreign household, even despite the fact that my wife is Japanese and my 2 kids are Japanese. So 47,317 households led by a foreign person are getting some sort of welfare benefits. That is 2.9%. So it seems like what they did is they just took a decimal point, shifted it to make a more dramatic statement. Nippon.com, which is the website that actually published a chart about sort of welfare benefits being distributed. That article has been taken out of context and been misconstrued and now is being used to disseminate misinformation. So they've actually taken that article down based on the result of this being claimed on X and being spread around, probably primarily because of the Sanseito people. Since we're talking politics, let's keep it in politics for a little while. Yoshiba, the current prime minister, he has decided to promote a group to coordinate with the government to focus on crime by foreigners, which seems really weird. Because again, I've done Into News Japan now, I don't know, it's been like 8 years. I've read a lot of news, and I don't tend to mention if they're Japanese and foreign, but I can tell you that the majority of the crimes in Japan that at least the news document are by Japanese people. When it is done by a foreign person, they always make special case to mention it. They never actually say like, here is a crime done by a Japanese person. It's always, here's a crime done by a foreign person. And that's a big deal. He said, we will promote various policies comprehensively to realize an orderly symbiotic society with foreigners centered on the control tower, which is one of the more dystopian statements I've heard in a long time. A lot of the recent election stuff has felt very dystopian. A lot of the Japanese party have very dystopian names. A lot of the Japanese politics, it seems to be taking on this very dystopian sounding pro, but actually being awful tone more than anything else, which I'm finding very weird. It's putting me in a very negative mind space, I guess, because I'm really not sure of the future of Japan if this sort of politics picks up, because the current what this is actually saying. So the reason I'm doing this story is that Senseido has pushed in, they've actually gotten a couple seats in government. And now you can see the government, the current policies, they're like, let's push farther that way, even if that's not really our foundation, so that we can get those votes, because that's what this is all about more than anything else, is getting attention, getting votes. And if hating on foreigners actually gets you the votes, that's what politicians are going to do. It's our last politics story. I'm sure that's enough for most people, if I'm being really honest. Kishiba, who used to be the prime minister, he was the prime minister for about 3 years. He's decided to take a very hard stance on something. It's ironic for someone who used to be the PM to take a hard stance on something. And it's because when he was PM, he could have done it. This is to me, a very Trump thing. People talk about what Trump's doing now, but he actually never did half the stuff he said he was going to do in the past. So people should be holding him to a standard like, while you were president, you could have done A, B, and C, like the healthcare thing. They completely have forgotten that. For his whole first campaign was like, we're going to get rid of healthcare and replace healthcare. He's in his second term and he still hasn't done anything on it. They've actually seemed to have forgotten about it completely and moved on to immigrants. This is not so different. So while he was prime minister, he could have actually had an impact on this, but he's decided to take on the credit card censorship for adult and problematic content. So you have like the Japanese version of OnlyFans, the Japanese version of video games with sexy content. One of the problems you run into if you run a platform that runs these kind of things is that MasterCard, Visa, all these large credit card companies, they're like, we don't want to have our brand connected to your brand. So we don't want to have our credit cards done for OnlyFans. We don't have our credit cards done for Fentia or Abima or any of these other websites where you could get some sexy content. They're saying this is sort of a financial version of censorship because most people have a Visa or a MasterCard or something like that, and not being able to use it on these sites actually diminishes the ability of these sites to make money, which means those sites are like, well, let's push aside that content to keep the credit card companies happy so that we can keep this system in place so that we can make more money. Kishiba claims that this is urgently needed online, which is, again, very weird because he could have actually tried to take it online while he was in power. This is interesting because this is a stance you have to take about like freedom and pornography and stuff. And the stuff so freedom has all the good stuff. You can do happy things, you can do friendly things, but then freedom also includes all the dark and gross stuff. Like if you want to look at dirty things on the internet, you should be allowed to look at dirty things on the internet. And so me as a politician standing up and saying that to people becomes very difficult because that's a very easily affected political platform, because people say, oh, you're a gross pervert. You love porn and things like that. And when you're actually advocating for is freedom, but then it gets turned into you're advocating for pornography. So now you're just a dirty, weird pornography. And then people don't want to vote for you because they don't want to be associated with the dirty pornographer. I think this is why he's doing it now, because now he's in power. He can actually say that the people in power should do it. He's saying that he has an idea of how to solve this problem, but he won't actually have to solve it because all he has to do is propose it. They'll say no, and he'll go, well, look, I tried. I stood up for my people, the weird pornography people, and the powers that be all said no. So I've learned about a new kind of harassment. We've learned about so many kinds of harassment on Ninja News Japan doing this over the years and years and years. Just the volume of different kinds of harassment are incredible. This is gray zone harassment. And gray zone harassment is when it's not harassment per se, but it's things that primarily older people do to make you uncomfortable. And so this is something that I'm actually worried now that I might be doing this and not even realize it. So they did a survey, and some of the things that came up in the gray zone of harassment was talking about the good old days. And so for old people in Japan, the 80s were the good old days. That was the bubble. That's when everyone had tons of money. It's when Japan was a powerhouse of the economy. It's when they were the best country in the world. This is something that old people sort of focus on, like when Japan used to be good. This is, again, sort of very MAGA idea of like, make America great again. This would be make Japan great again, make it like the 80s again. But the question they never bring up is what were we doing in the 80s that was so different from what we're doing now? And does what we did in the 80s actually work now? Because I bet the answer is actually no. So talking about the good old days is a problem. Size, tongue clicking, ignoring greetings, and forced participation in drinking parties. So size, so like I'm talking and then the older person goes, That was probably a bit too much, but a tongue clicking, like, you get a little bit of that in there. And then you say hello to this person who you're supposed to be working with, and they just ignore you completely. Forced participation in drinking has been a common issue for at least the last 5 years. COVID actually brought this to the forefront because a lot of people were saying, because of COVID, I don't have to go out drinking and I'm a lot happier because of it. And so since post-COVID, people are far, far less likely to go out drinking with their coworkers because they can make excuses, and it's now no longer the norm. Whereas these old people want to bring back the old norms, and that's one of the problems we run into. Comments based on past customs. Now, this is a little unclear, but again, we used to do it this way, so you should do it that way now. It's a very Japanese sentiment, in my opinion, is this way is old. So like fax machines. I like getting it faxed so I can stamp the piece of paper so I can fax it back to my coworker. Doing it all digitally, I don't like that anymore. That kind of comment really frustrates young people who have to be working with these old people. Personal values and prejudices. Coercion to answer private questions. Yeah, I mean, how many stories on Ninja News Japan have we done where it's an old Japanese dude saying something really gross or sexist, misogynistic, or racist because he's old? Because he grew up in a time when that was acceptable, and his brain hasn't updated to realize that's not acceptable anymore. The coercion to answer private questions is like, well, I want to know about your private life because my life is so boring and empty now, and you don't want to tell me, and I think that's offensive, so now we have this sort of point of conflict. This has led people to consider quitting their jobs. And it turns out that drinking with colleagues is the worst offender. So the thing that drives young employees away from companies the most is being forced to go out and drink with their coworkers. If you want to do it voluntarily, that's fine. If you want to create a happy atmosphere, that's fine. But forcing people to do it, I think just as soon as you say we're forcing people to go out and do stuff, you're already like losing a lot of people. That's always going to create a certain amount of unhappiness. They also did a survey of the people who had caused the gray harassment, and they all believed that their questions, their personal probing, their attitudes were all well-intentioned, and they couldn't really see the problem, which is, again, the problem with being old. The Japanese government wants people to use generative AI. I don't know why. I've actually been on like a really negative thing with AI. I think it's because when AI was introduced as a concept, so let's go back like 6 years, it wasn't still like a thing you could just do yet. So it was still conceptual. And they said AI is going to fix climate change. AI is going to fix food disparity. So we're going to redistribute food so that everyone has enough food. AI is going to create medicines that are designed specifically for you and your ailments. So I'll be able to get medicine that deals with me personally and my physiology and all that stuff. And I haven't seen any of that since AI has been introduced. What they've done has been like, hey, let's try to put writers out of work. Movie studios want to like take writers' work, put them into a big engine, and then just produce movie scripts without actually paying anyone. They get it in perpetuity. I read a thing during the actors' strike, I think last year. One of the content points was, if you're a background actor, so you're just like an extra in a movie, they want to have licensing of your face in perpetuity, which means if you get famous but then move to a different company, let's say I am in the background of a Netflix movie, and then I move over and I start to get bigger roles and I become a leading man at Universal. Netflix still owns my face so that they can create AI versions of me and make movies with that, with my face, my personality, my voice, which has now become really popular over at Universal Films because they own my face in perpetuity, which means forever, which means they can make movies based on me and my IP forever, and I don't get any money for it. And I can see that as being a big problem. And then there's all the art stuff, like all the Ghibli art, like the fact that Ghibli, taking a picture that I have taken and making it Ghibli art, and that's increasing climate change, is to me about as disgusting, because Ghibli is one of those like pro-nature balance kind of stories all the time. And it's always about trying to do the best, and AI is just doing the worst, because they're really just, let's not do all the science stuff. Let's just take art away from humanity. I mean, I was playing with AI to try to get this podcast in Japanese, and it did my voice. I didn't actually ask it to, and it cloned my voice and started having me speak in Japanese. And it was like, well, the next step would be the AI making the podcast altogether, like taking all the 300 episodes from previously, taking what commentary I make, creating a new version of that, grabbing some news stories and just making it. And then what do I do? Because I might still be making Ninja News Japan, but it's going to have better SEO. It's going to have better promotion. It's going to have better everything. If all that stuff is automated and I don't do it, now someone else who's used AI is getting money off this podcast that I can't make money off of because I'm not good enough at it. It turns out that 26.7% of people in Japan have touched AI. Doesn't mean they use it regularly. It means they've tried it once or twice, decided they don't like. I don't use it on a regular basis. I might try it every now and then to see what kind of results it gives, but AI is not a part of my life yet. I have used voice to text, which is a kind of AI, but I actually think that's not really AI because it's not doing any thinking or processing. It's just like, let's take these sounds and turn them into text so that I now have a text document. So if you go to the website, ninjanewsjapan.com, you can actually see this episode and then see the script that goes along with it. I honestly don't barely even check it, so I don't know how accurate it is, but it was just one of those things I thought, it'd be good to have that on the internet should someone actually want to see it. So only 26% of people in Japan have actually even touched AI. It's 81.2% in China, 68.8% in the US, and 59.2% in Germany. So they're saying they want Japanese people. The government is saying they want Japanese people to use AI more, but they're not saying in what way or how that's going to actually be valuable to you or how it's actually going to benefit you. And then again, we still have all this old complement of people who are in companies, the people we just talked about with the gray harassment, who are still trying to use fax machines, still trying to do things the old way, still trying to do things like they were in the 1980s because that's the time they reminisce about the most. How are you supposed to get those people to use AI except to replace them, which actually might be better? You come here for the crime, and the rest of the stories are crime. We're out of politics now. A Tokyo trading card shop was robbed. A man came in and he threatened the owner with a knife. He took 123 items. Now, it being Pokemon cards, that's going to be a lot of cards. He took some cash, he took some cards, but he took 123 items. In total, it equaled $94,000. So the cash from the register and the cards. And one of the stories I did previously was the problem of me, let's say, going in and robbing a Pokemon store. I wouldn't know which cards were the most valuable. So I'd be like, the Pikachus, I'll take all the Pikachus. I'm sure Pikachus are quite common because it's a popular character, so everyone gets a Pikachu in every pack. So it's actually one of the least valuable cards. So you need to know what you're doing. Well, he ended up with a $94,000 haul. Turns out the suspect was staff at a nearby trading card store. So on the same road, in the same neighborhood, there were two trading card stores. One went from their store to the other store and robbed them. They would actually have the expertise to know which cards to steal. So I have a little bit of respect for that. But you don't rob in your own neighborhood. You don't rob in your own neighborhood because it's going to be pretty easy for people to recognize you or catch you or to figure it out. If all the cards that I had stolen from my store show up in your store down the road, that's going to come to light and you're going to get arrested, which is exactly what happened here, which it actually turns out there's three people. They think the manager of the store, probably because he was fencing it, one of the employees who actually went and did the robbery, and one other person, which they didn't say how they were involved, but I'm sure it was something similar. I actually bet that would be going out and scoping out the store. A 55-year-old man was arrested for putting stones on railway tracks. And this is one of those things I was like, I think I would have done that when I was a kid. Like I would have put some pebbles and stuff on and see if they get crushed or smashed or like shoot off. Probably I'd be dumb enough to stand near it and get shot in the head by a rock that's been shot off by a train running over it. It was big enough that the train actually stopped. So he was arrested for endangering train traffic and obstruction of business. Obstruction of business is back, baby. The train hit the stone and had to make an emergency stop. No one was hurt on the train because emergency stops means they hit the brakes hard and so people can fall over and stuff, but it damaged the train's front guard, which means the person at least at minimum is going to have to pay for that. So if you're in Japan, I crossed train tracks at least twice on the way to the train station from my house so that I can actually catch the train so that I can go to work. Train tracks are plentiful. Don't do this because not only are you going to get in trouble, you're also probably going to get caught because they all have cameras around. Another man doing another weird thing. A man strung a rope across a road. Basically, there's a light pole and a fence, and he wants to put his string across. Now, in movies, this is used to decapitate people on motorcycles. I've actually seen it a couple of times in movies. They put up a fishing wire or a garrote wire or something like that, and then a guy on a motorcycle rides by and it cuts his head off. This case, he used a rope. It was a bit thicker, but it was still thin enough to actually hurt someone, like actually cut their skin or something like that. So he started setting it up, and then someone started coming along, so he just dropped it and left. And then so it was lying across the road. And then a few minutes later, after everyone was gone, he came back and he picked it up and he strung it up, showing intent. He wasn't doing some random thing, and then that random thing became an accidental attempted murder. This was very purposeful because he went back to finish the job. He started setting it up. Someone left, someone came, he left, he came back, he set it up to finish. It was clearly premeditated. And then a few minutes later, a man on a bicycle rides over and he hits it. It's a 6mm piece of nylon. It didn't actually cut him, but it knocked him off his bike and he was really hurt. And then he gets up and he's very confused and he walks away. He said, ouch. But it caused him actual physical damage. He fell off his bicycle. He got really hurt. Now, in Japan, setting up a rope like this is attempted murder. So he's being arrested for attempted murder. The only statements he's made is, I did not intend to kill. But the question is, what did you intend to do? A 6mm line across a road if someone was going fast enough? What did you intend to have happen? I would love that explanation. Classic Ninja News Japan problem. We're not actually going to get the explanation because he's going to go to court and we're never going to hear from him again. We've talked about rescues of Mount Fuji's the last 3 or 4 episodes. The Mount Fuji trails were not open. And so maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe because it's not a good time to be climbing up Mount Fuji. Maybe because they're closed because there's no safety crews, because there's no one there to help you if something goes wrong. Well, people, primarily Americans, seem to ignore that. On June 26th, so he'd actually gone up on July 4th, but he stayed up there until June 26th. He'd hiked up the mountain. This American man had hiked up the mountain, intending to camp near the 7th station. Now, I can't honestly tell you if the 7th station is very high. I'm assuming it is because no one else was around. On June 26th, he hiked up the mountain, intending to camp near the top. He intended to camp near the 7th station. I can't tell you if the 7th station is very high. I'm assuming it is because no one else was around. On July 4th, other people had to call emergency services on his behalf because saying a foreign man is calling out for help from his tent. Somehow he'd managed to bring up camping gear. He'd managed to bring up sort of cold weather clothes, but he only had sandals. Maybe the reason he couldn't get down is because his feet were too cold, because he had to save his feet. He was brought down from the 7th to the 5th station where police and emergency services could take over. He was suffering from hypothermia because of the cold. He had cold weather gear, but only had sandals with him. He said he's done this hike before. So maybe that hike came with the overconfidence, which is why he felt like he could do it this time. The next day, July 5th, another call at 8 p.m. A woman was saying, I'm lost on Mount Fuji. It's dark and I'm very frightened. She got lost while climbing down. So what she actually did was she went up one route, sort of made a weird wrong turn on her way down, and then came down the wrong way. But again, no one's there to guide you. No one's there to help you. The reason it's locked or closed or the trails are closed is because they don't want you going up there because it's not safe. And then people keep going up because it's not safe. So if you learned anything, listen to Ninja Japan. Don't go up Mount Fuji. Even when it's open, it's not that worth it. The last weird story of the day, there were crane games. And from those crane games, you could actually get toy guns. These were called the Real Gimmick Mini Revolvers. Now, there's actually a whole bunch, not just revolvers, but the Real Gimmick Mini Revolvers had an interesting facet to them. If you won them, you could get one and modify it to shoot real bullets. So basically, everything was in place. You could load it with bullets, real bullets, and then just actually make a small modification to the triggering system and would actually shoot real bullets. So the gun itself was plastic, which actually means it could get through a metal detector. And then if you could get real bullets once you were through the metal detector, you could have a real functioning gun with the Real Gimmick Mini Revolver. These have been recalled. The owners have asked people to return them. The police have actually said this is in violation of the Gun and Sword Act in Japan, which means you have until December 31st to turn them in. Now, you didn't know. They're going to go ahead and assume you didn't know that this could be modified into a real gun when you won it. So you can return it by December 31st. You will not get in trouble. But if you do not, if you hold on to this gun, you are now committing a crime after December 31st. So they're giving you lots of time. This is 6 months to turn your gun in. If you don't do it, you're committing a crime, and having that gun is illegal.